A judge has now delayed the trial of 3 former Minneapolis police officers charged in the death of George Floyd until next year. J. Alexander King, Thomas Lane, and Tu Tao are facing charges of aiding and abetting second-degree murder and manslaughter. They were set to go to trial in August until this week, when a judge pushed that trial back to March of 2022, saying that there needs to be more space between that trial and the sentencing of Derek Chauvin, now set for June 25th. 9 News legal analyst Whitney Traylor joins us now. He's also an associate professor at Metropolitan State University of Denver. So the Chauvin trial, of course, drew so much attention, raised so much emotion. Is this, though, common for a judge to see fit to move court cases based on things like the public reaction?
Good afternoon, Tom, and everyone. It's a great question, and it is somewhat unusual, but you have to consider the case that we're dealing with. This case is completely unusual in so many different ways. And so here, because of the amount of publicity that the case received, these other 3 defendants were scheduled to go to trial in August. Well, Derek Chauvin, as we know, was convicted and found guilty of murdering George Floyd. He's scheduled to be sentenced on June 25th. What I think the judge was anticipating was that the sentencing, whether people are happy or unhappy with it, will garner so much attention that going to trial then less than 60 days later could create issues for those further defendants. So I think what the judge was doing was trying to avoid a basis for an appeal and saying, we're going to push it back till March. There's a second reason, though, because recently all 4 officers were charged by a federal grand jury with a 3-count indictment. And so they're being charged with criminal violations of George Floyd's constitutional rights. So that matter will also probably go to trial even before they get their state criminal trial in March of next year.
That's what I wanted to ask you about. You talk about that, which takes precedence, the federal trial over the state trial, but also these men on trial are also guaranteed a speedy trial by the Constitution. Now it's going to be delayed quite a bit further.
That's correct. Although I'll tell you, Tom, their attorneys, all 3 or 4 defense attorneys, agreed actually with the postponement. So these charges now, the federal charges that are being brought by the Department of Justice, those are federal criminal charges that say, look, these officers were acting under the color of state law, meaning they were in their official capacities when they violated George Floyd's constitutional rights. And so to succeed on these charges, the prosecution is going to have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Derek Chauvin and the others acted willfully to deprive George Floyd of his civil rights. And they used force that was constitutionally unreasonable. So this is going to be actually a tough case to prosecute, because in their defense, they could say we were not willfully seeking to deprive him of his constitutional rights when we stayed on his neck and when we didn't give medical aid. They might argue, hey, we were acting out of fear or panic or even poor judgment to avoid that trial. So there's going to be quite a bit of litigation coming up.
Well, you talk about it being a tough prosecution, but King, Lane, and Tao also have a very difficult defense in front of them, obviously with Chauvin already convicted, but also the multi-lane prosecution they're facing. They have the federal and the state trial, and there are civil charges as well.
That's exactly right, Tom. And this matter, all of these entities that are investigating, this was such a stain on America, and this was such a publicized and concerning situation that all of these entities that are getting involved are ensuring that other constitutional violations did not take place. So here, the Department of Justice, in addition to the criminal claims I just mentioned, they've also launched a civil probe into the Minneapolis police force. And here they're going to be investigating to determine if there was a pattern or practice of unconstitutional or unlawful policing. And one specific issue, Tom, will be the press release that was actually sent out after George Floyd was killed and before the video was released. And the press release reads like something completely inaccurate in terms of what actually happened. It said George Floyd had an interaction with the police. He received medical attention. He died after receiving medical attention. That's the way it was phrased. So the Department of Justice they're looking into the way that Minneapolis does everything. And one of the criminal charges I forgot to mention against Derek Chauvin on the constitutional violations relates to another case where he essentially beat a 14-year-old and also had his knee on that 14-year-old's neck. So those charges are being investigated as well.
Well, the conviction of Derek Chauvin certainly was a big day, but there is still much more involving Minneapolis PD, Derek Chauvin, and those other 3 officers. Whitney Traylor, we always appreciate you taking a few minutes to try to sort this out for us. Thanks.
Thanks. It's good to be here.